Today we're going to be talking about effective feedback. Now, I've actually taught on a few different effective feedback models, but one of my favorite is called the radical candor. It's a feedback model that balances this directness with care. Now, the reason why I like this model over some of the others is the impact of it. So, poor feedback can lead to resentment and confusion and that stagnation, and good feedback builds that trust and performance and growth, not only for your company, but in the relationship. Now, the reality is many people struggle with feedback. Either they're too harsh, or they're too vague, or they're avoiding it altogether. And I often saw that in HR, 2 decades in HR in the manufacturing industry. And I would get to an employee's last disciplinary meeting, or I would have to actually terminate them for something that they've had many disciplinary meetings before that. And they would still be surprised. And it's because the paperwork and the feedback their leader was giving them was complete opposites, because that leader was too vague, or that leader was avoiding it altogether. So then when it got to the point where they're exiting the company, they were surprised. And an employee should never be surprised why they're separating, especially in an involuntary situation. The other half of this is too harsh. So sometimes people give feedback like complete word vomit. Like, it comes from a very personal conflict place, judgmental, and that is not very constructive. It's more insulting. So feedback fails mostly because fear of conflict, avoiding tough conversations to keep the peace. You haven't given a lot of feedback, so you feel uncomfortable. Lack of clarity, so they're giving kind of indirect or sugar-coated feedback. They used to call it the Oreo effect, where you give like good news and then bad news and then good news again, right? So you sandwich it in. And that was just so indirect and sugar-coated that you weren't really getting the real message through. And I think the real problem with that is if you're trying to give feedback, especially constructive feedback, like you want a behavior to change, if you are vague or you're sandwiching it or you're confusing the recipient of this feedback, the behavior won't change. So it's actually detrimental to them because you're setting them up to fail. And when I work with leaders on this in our mastermind and in our leadership programs, that gets them to do the feedback. Because when you don't do effective feedback, you are failing them as their coach, as their leader. So just remember that as you're approaching this uncomfortable situation of feedback, is this lack of clarity in your comfort zone is actually causing you more issues and them the only path, which is the way out. Now, the overcritical approach, the harsh approach I was talking about, is people who focus only on the flaws and they don't show care. They don't offer solutions. They're really just insulting and downing someone the whole time. And then the other part of an overcritical approach is inconsistent feedback. So they're addressing problems only when they boil over and then they blow up. They will avoid regular check-ins, and then when things get so derailed, then they turn into this very poor communicator that no one wants to be around. Let's go through this radical candor model that just balances that directness with care so that we can constructively give feedback and address the behaviors we want to see more of or address the behaviors we want to see less of. So radical candor is challenge directly and care personally. So the best approach is to be honest but supportive. So a way to say that is, I know you're capable of doing better work. Here's how we can work together to improve it. Again, you're showing support, but you're also saying we need to improve. It's showing you care and that you believe in them, but it's also showing you are below expectations. Ruinious empathy is care personally, but don't challenge directly. So this is avoiding discomfort, but stunts the growth. So this is kind of a mismatch one where it avoids discomfort, but stunts the growth. And this is a good example where someone would say, you did great, but they didn't really address any of the needs improvement, especially with the people that need to improve. Again, you're stunting their growth where they need to change their behaviors. And then there's obnoxious aggression. So this is challenge directly, but you don't care personally. And this means you're too blunt and you're damaging morale. So these are kind of the scary leaders, the scary feedback that gets us into this conflict avoidance. So a great example is, this is terrible, fix it, right? It shows a lot of blame. It shows a lot of aggression. It shows a lot of pointing fingers. And there's not a lot of personal care or curiosity in it. Now, there's manipulative insincerity, and that's neither challenging nor caring. So this is your passive aggressives. This is the people that are avoiding accountability. This is people that say, it's fine, and it's really not. And then they'll go talk to someone else and gossip back here, or they'll throw someone under the bus over here. So where you want to be out of those four is radical candor, because at work you're giving feedback that you would want to receive, right? It's honest, it's actionable, and respectful. And at home, when you give radical candor, it's honest with kindness, and it leads to impactful and deep conversations instead of avoiding conflict. Now, you want to focus on the behavior, not so much on the identity. So if you say something like, you're bad at this, right? You're focused on the identity, not so much the behavior, and it's sending a confusing message, and it's very personal, so you're going to put them on the defense, versus something more behavioral approach, which is, this approach didn't work. So you're focusing more on how the behavior response and the actual task at hand, the approach, is interacting. Now, feedback isn't a one-time thing. You need to check in often to see progress, and the perfect way to do that is practice. When I first started training on feedback models, I was an international trainer, and when we got introduced to my very first feedback model, why you want to practice is it's going to get you more comfortable with giving feedback. And I saw this in my own behavior when I started learning feedback models. And I was an international trainer, and when we got our first feedback model, we were actually learning it to become the trainers, and it was an international organization. So some of these people didn't speak English. It was their second or third languages, and I didn't know them. And we had to give constructive feedback using this model 20 times in 4 days, which it doesn't seem like much when you have long training days, but you don't know these people. And then again, we had some language barriers, we had some cultural barriers there, and it was uncomfortable. Like, I was giving constructive feedback in like an elevator or a hallway or over lunch. But the whole purpose was to get us comfortable giving feedback in a constructive way. And we got into that radical candor as we started building these relationships, as we could get more direct and honest with what we were saying. And it comes from a place of support and growth. So by the 20th time, I got really good at giving feedback, and it was more of a comfort space. It was more of a flow of conversation in a way that I knew how to navigate the approach. I knew how to begin the feedback conversation. So make sure that you're getting your reps in and practicing, especially in the good times, so that you're prepared for the bad times to apply this radical candor. Now, I want you to shift your thinking as you start applying this, that feedback isn't about being nice or mean. It's about helping people improve and showing you care.